What's up, buds? I'm here with my new Transition Patrol. I've been on it for the past couple of months and I've had a lot of you asking how I like it compared to my Enduro. So now, after going to multiple places with it, riding it in a bunch of different areas, I finally feel like it's time to let you guys know. So first things first, before we get started, I want to let you guys know that this is not a review of me crunching the geo numbers. If that's what you're looking for, this is not it. But what I will say is, compared to my S4 Enduro, which I had previously, my large Patrol is a little bit shorter of a wheelbase, a little bit shorter of a reach, and a little bit slacker. So keep that in mind throughout the duration of this video. Before we get into the details of how I like the bike, I want to just go through an overview of the parts that I switched out on this and what I'm running on the bike. So, as is from Transition, they nailed this build. It comes with full Fox factory suspension with XT group set. So we've got XT brakes, XT drivetrain on there, XT cranks. We've also got one-up components supplying the dropper and the dropper lever, which is awesome, as well as the bash guard chain guide combo back there. Anvil components handled the cockpit setup too with their bar and stem. There were a few things I changed though on this build, and those were wheels, tires, and grips. Now this bike came with some nice alloy wheels from DT Swiss. It came with their EX 1700 spline wheels, which are great wheels by the way, but I really prefer carbon. The aluminum wheels don't provide as much strength or a lifetime warranty that the carbon ones do. So I'm a big fan of carbon. I put a brand new set of E13 wheels on here and I absolutely love them. Mounted on those wheels, of course, is no other than Michelin tires. My Michelin DH22s are getting a little beat up, but we hopefully have some fresh ones coming in soon. The stock tires on this just were not doing it for me, and Maxxis, as you guys all know, never does it for me. So Michelin tires on here. The other little thing I changed was grips. I really like the DD Super Cush grips. They're a little bit thicker. I just have used those the past couple seasons and I've really come to like them. So as you can see, I didn't change much on this build. Transition was one of the only companies that pretty much nailed this bike to begin with. With that being said, this bike retailed at like $5,600, I think. So that's a killer price. That's on par with common saw prices and YT prices. So Transition, you guys nailed the build on this bike. There was just a few things that I changed for my personal preference, but otherwise, nailed it. Now, I'm also not here to tell you which bike is better, the Transition Patrol or my previous Enduro that I had, because I honestly don't think one is necessarily better. They're both killer bikes, top spec bikes, so they both ride like a dream, as you can imagine. With that being said, there are some key differences. I've been on this bike the past couple of months. I've raced it at our local spot at Horns Hill. I've went to Windrock with it for a weekend. I've went to Snowshoe closing weekend with it. So this bike has done about everything that it needs to do for me. So I know enough about it now and I have enough experience that I know the differences between it and the Enduro, and I'm gonna tell you about it. So how does this thing ride? This thing absolutely rips. I loved my Enduro, but I love this thing too. Taking this thing to Windrock, super slack mullet bike was amazing. In the super steep and tight corners on Talladega, that's where I noticed it the most. The short wheelbase and the mullet setup just absolutely hooked up in those corners and felt awesome. Thing charges through chunk too, handles high speed well. It's just an extremely capable bike that I'm super stoked to ride, and I'm really stoked to get more time on. So one of the main differences between my Patrol and the Enduro is that the Patrol is an alloy frame, the Enduro is a carbon frame. And I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I don't really notice a difference between those. Now, I'm sure I would if I had the same bike, same spec, same settings, but the only difference being the frame material, and I was testing it back to back. I don't have the ability to do that, nor do I really care to. I like aluminum, I like carbon. Bike feels stiff, feels strong, so I have no complaints about that. Yeah, it might be a little bit heavier, but it's cheaper in the long run, so that's a win for me. This bike is way cheaper than anything from Specialized, so that's a win in my book. But once again, they're both great bikes. Carbon, aluminum, can't go wrong with either in my opinion. So with geo numbers being so close on all enduro bikes these days, the main difference between this and my enduro was pretty much the suspension design. So obviously the suspension on the enduro and this bike look completely different, and they feel completely different too. The enduro feels like a Cadillac. It's just smooth sailing over everything. The bike makes you feel like you're riding slow because it works so well, but you're actually riding really fast. This bike, on the other hand, gives you a lot more feedback, not in a negative way because the suspension and everything still feels great, but you just have a lot more feedback from the trail, allowing you to get more playful on the bike and kind of like pop around and have more fun, jib around the trail, which I really like. It's a nice change for me as I've been on the enduro the past 2 seasons. One of the most common questions I get with this being a low, slack mullet bike is how often I hit my cranks on the ground. And that all kind of depends on your riding style. I've noticed on basically every bike, if you're trying to pedal through tech or chunk, you're gonna make contact with your cranks at some point. I have made contact with my cranks, but what I can say is that was only when I was trying to pedal through sections. So that happened on my enduro too. It happens on this bike. You just gotta be smart about crank placement and when you're pedaling and where you're placing them, whatever. You're gonna hit them on any bike, so it is what it is, deal with it. Another thing people were asking me compared to the enduro is how does this thing pedal compared to the enduro? And here's my take on all of that. Pedaling sucks ass no matter what bike you're on. If you're on a more efficient bike, it still sucks ass, but the bike is going a little bit faster. That's my take on it. Now, between this and my other bike, I don't notice enough of a difference whether or not this one pedals better or worse to be able to tell you which is which. Pedaling sucks for me no matter what. One of them might be faster, but this thing pedals just fine. The enduro pedaled just fine, so I don't think anyone's really gonna have that much of an issue with it. Now I have been running this in the high and low position. I've been running it in the high. I ran it in the low position when I went to Windrock and Snowshoe. And what I will say is I do prefer this in the high position because it's already a slack and low bike as it is. So in the high position, I think the head tube angle is at like 63.5 degrees, which is still pretty slack for an enduro bike. So I prefer it in the high position. I'll only really drop it in the low position when I go to steep places like Windrock. Other than that, I'm running it in the high position and that's where I'm leaving it. Now I do want to highlight one big change for me coming from the enduro, and that is going from SRAM group set to Shimano. The biggest difference being the brakes. So we'll get to that in a second, but I do want to address the cassette first. This cassette has Shimano's Hyperglide feature on it, which allows you to shift up under load, which I've really come to like. On steep technical climbs, you can shift once, twice if you want to, and there's none of that clunking like you get with other drivetrains. So big ups to Shimano for that, and that was a really welcomed difference, welcomed new feature. The brakes are also a big difference. Now you guys know I have experience with SRAM, Hayes, Magura. This is my first time with Shimano brakes, and I can pretty confidently say that these are probably my favorite brakes that I've had yet. And the reason for that is that the lever feel, bite point feels super crisp. The bite point on my Hayes and my Magura MT7 Pros felt great too, but these ones feel like I just need a little less squeeze to get the power that I want. So I struggled a lot at the Windrock Downhill Southeast with arm pump from braking so much. And I think these are gonna help a lot because I don't have to squeeze quite as hard to get that same amount of power that I want. Now I know a lot of you probably don't like that. You like more modulation, but to me, I really like the power that these Shimano brakes have. So we'll see long-term how I like it. Now it's pretty obvious that I'm stoked on this bike, but there are a couple things that I need to nitpick about this bike. I wish it could be all positive, but I gotta be honest with you guys about the 2 things that I'm just not too stoked on about this bike. First one being the paint. The paint on these bikes are honestly quite shit. Surface scratches and stuff are happening super fast. This bike is basically still brand new, but there's a ton of surface scratches coming up, and I can already tell that long term this is gonna be an issue. But since this is alloy, I do have the option to get it repainted eventually, so I'm not too concerned about it. You could also ride wrap it, but I really don't have the patience to do that, and it drives me crazy every time I do it. The other thing that I had to nitpick about this is the bearings. We're not sure, but Chase and I both have a feeling that we're gonna be having to replace bearings quite a bit more on these bikes. So the Specialized Enduros have a rubber gasket around all of the bearing bolts. This does not. So with that being said, we can expect that we'll have to change bearings on this more often, which is not a huge deal, but it's just a little thing that Specialized did to their bikes that was super nice. Other than those couple things that I had to nitpick, I'm super stoked on this bike. Obviously, this is a short-term review. I've only had it for a couple months, so we'll see throughout the next season how this thing holds up and how my opinion changes or how it stays the same. I'm pretty confident I'm gonna get on well with this bike all the way through the next season, so I look forward to riding and racing this thing all of next year. And if you guys have any more questions about the bike, if I missed anything, drop a comment below. Make sure to subscribe for more of these types of videos. So thanks for watching.